I've had certain IFBB pro bikini girls take more diuretics than my top male bodybuilders just because they flux more water.
What's up, everyone? It's Russo. I hope everyone is doing well here with Grandmaster Kikel, theprepcoach.com. I wanted to go into peak week mistakes, and I wanted to venture into my apology to you because I remember the one thing I said on a podcast about you is that when you were first starting out, you did your own prep, and that has been the stain of your biohacking. You have then gone on to prep IFBB pros, laundry list of clients, NFL, NHL athletes. Go into what you've learned during your experimentations with peak week, because it's nothing more disappointing than doing that entire prep. Your prep coach like has it down, he knows your body, blah blah blah, obliterates you in front of your peers on the show. You're left to blame the coach blames you. You look like crap, you binge eat, you gain 50 pounds of fat, and then you never compete again where you could have had a lot of potential. Go into peak week and what you've seen with your clients personally on a local level as well as an IFBB pro professional level.
Definitely. First of all, I looked like garbage. That was going through a transitional period in my life where my family was actually going through a process of disowning me. Not an excuse or anything, but I was happy.
Disowning from what?
The family. They did some crazy things in the end there. It got really, really bad. Again, I try to always stay positive and everything, but they taught me exactly how to not be a parent. Okay. Now I have kids, and now I know exactly what to do because I do the opposite of what they did. We had a great childhood, and then it just sadly transitioned as money comes involved, like with my business. That changed some people. Not fun. So, yeah, I looked like garbage on stage, and then the next week after that show, actually, I had one guy go and almost win his pro card in the NPC by he lost by 1 point in the overall. And so I had a lot of people like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about? Oh, well, he obviously does. And it skyrockets from there. But
well, I mean, there's no denying now in your current place in your career, but that is
I'm
one
a terrible
of the
athlete
pivots.
Myself, but I like to think I'm a good coach.
I would say you're a good coach, Alex.
So getting back to your original question, mistakes people make. I think first of all, we have to understand what exactly is going on at a nephron-based level. So the whole thing with peak week is you're ready. You're maybe losing some additional fat during peak week, but you should be ready by then, right? Male or female, you should be ready to go. You start peak week, it's just about putting the right thing in the right places. What that means is fluid, ions, and glucose all go in tandem. So glucose is going to follow water, which is going to follow, if I can have a third hand right here, your ions. So sodium, potassium, that sodium chloride, that whole shifting process goes. So they all follow each other, and they generally go through the process of that blood volume first, then the muscular volume, then subcutaneous. So if you reverse that to dry out overnight, you're trying to dry out, deplete everything, and then restore blood volume, then muscular volume, because what happens if you go to sub-Q volume? You look spilled. So we understand that, right? We start looking at how the week is set up. We are generally, for most people, doing this kind of inverse relationship where carbohydrates are coming down, doesn't mean calories, fats can go up. We need to start depleting a little bit, so we start upregulating glycogen synthase, so starting that hyperstorage process. As glucose goes down, fluid has to go up, ions have to go up. So we're trying to create the perfect scenario, so at the end, glucose goes up, ions go down, competition day, it's really just based on the person. Some people won't eat or drink at all. Some people will eat a ton and drink a ton. It's dependent on the individual for that final day. But usually we're trying to deplete the first 5 days. The final 2 days, we go ahead and we bring in our actual carbohydrates. Usually with fluid and ions are going back to normal, then kind of getting half, something like that. But the whole point is so that you wake up on competition morning. You should be somewhat spilled the night before the show. Wake up the morning of, depending on what diuretics you used, or maybe even not diuretics, just natural diuresis from fluxing that fluid throughout the peak week. You're waking up flat, but super lean. So you don't look as super lean as you could be because muscle bellies aren't pushing out against the skin, right? Mm-hmm. So you wake up and you're kind of like, I look good, but I'm not going to place well on stage. And then every hour you eat, every second that goes by, we're waking up at 80%, slowly getting to 83, 86, 89. Mm-hmm. We want to get about 95, 98% right before we pump up. We pump up. I like a big bolus of sodium there. What's sodium do? What we talk about here, those sodium chloride ions, pulls water, pulls glucose, everything from the bloodstream into muscular tissue. Could be a little bit of insulin in there depending on who you are. Could not be if you're like maybe a bikini female who doesn't need that. Depends on the division and what they need. But then you pump up and you get to 100%. You walk out. You look your best. You come off. You generally start eating right away because you just burn through a lot of that glucose. It's that temporary fullness that we're trying to drive. So you're perfect on stage, come off stage, and depending on when finals are. If you have like now they're doing like the straight shows, right? Ever since COVID, where it's like prejudging straight into finals, that would change that post prejudging scenario where you're going to come off, start eating right away. Other ones, you could have a bigger meal, then kind of space things out. It'll depend. But that's like the general brief description of how we have peak week kind of set up.
Okay, go into diuretics and how that changes. Like, again, people love getting a behind the scenes at IFBB pro level, diuretic usage and the dangers associated, but the obvious need for the bigger athletes. How, as obviously you started prepping, you got into the IFBB pro athletes, has your peak week methods changed, or pretty much the same thing you just explained out, just at a bigger scale?
Similar, but you get better at the nuances. So all diuretics work in the nephrons. So the nephrons are the smallest function unit of the kidneys, right? So imagine a little ball right here, tunnel goes down, comes up, then goes back down over here. So if we look at that glomerulus over here, this is the nephron. We have that distal convoluted tubule, that loop of Henle, that the proximal convoluted tubule, distal convoluted tubule over here, and then over here, the late and early collecting ducts. So we look at that process. Down here, the loop of Henle, that's where Lasix works. So it's going to drive the most amount of diuretic action, okay? But more doesn't always get better. You come up through here, go into that distal convoluted tubule. That's more like the thiazides, so diazides and things like that work. And then you go into that early, late collecting duct, depending on the literature, what you're reading. That's where your aldactone works. As it goes throughout the nephron, closer to that collecting duct down here, it's driving less and less diuresis. But also, it's causing less potential for negative side effects. So Lasix works super good down here. Again, quick little take-home bullet points. You're not dosing it super, super high. A lot of people get away with just 40 milligrams or 20 milligrams or 10 milligrams orally before bed the night before the show. That diazide cascade over here, you could be as low as a quarter of a milligram, assuming it's like a 37, 25, 25 milligram, because obviously that's a combined product of hydrochlorothiazide and triamptorine. Aldactone-wise, that's mainly used to just collect and store more potassium. So if we are using Lasix, that's going to waste potassium. So what we would do with a Lasix scenario is most likely aldactone throughout peak week, not to drive fluid loss, just to conserve potassium, so we can waste potassium and water with Lasix the night before the show. Competition day, you usually don't need it. Diazide comes in for the person who doesn't have a ton of fluid to lose, but they just want to be slightly sharper. That comes in usually night before the show. We're trying to time that about roughly 5 p.m. or so to match circadian diuresis. Matches super, super well for a lot of athletes. We cut off water after that. We have that diazide the night before the show. Again, could be a quarter tablet, could be a full tablet. It's more so based on the individual. I've had certain IFBB pro bikini girls take more diuretics than my top male bodybuilders just because they flux more water. If a female fluxes like 8 kilos of water and that pro fluxes 4, you're going to need more based on the person. So it's not so much the division they're in, it's more the person, how much fluid loss they need. And generally how they respond to diuretics in the first place, because you don't even need pharmaceutical diuretics if you don't want to. I prefer them for the vast majority of people because they're so safe. There's a reason why like furosemide had like 5 million prescriptions last year. They're so safe. They literally save people's lives. In this scenario, though, we're just using it for the cosmetic purposes, so lower dosages are better. I think that's where most people screw up. It's not 300 milligrams of aldactone. It's not 100 milligrams of Lasix.
Yeah,
it's not 3 diazide. It's a smaller amount. Less is more with diuretics. And then if you have like, this is getting a little more into the weeds, but there's like a calcium problem to where the person is ready, they go to pump up, but yet they can't pump up, right? They had all the glucose, all the water, all the sodium in the world, can't pump up. What's wrong? Calcium ion fluxing. So what should you have done? Assuming this was like an aldactone Lasix thing, Lasix wasted too many calcium ions, a little bit of diazide the night before. Could be literally an eighth of a tablet. You can really smash it up, put it on a little microgram scale, and lick your finger, dip it on, and that's enough to drive enough calcium ion retention so you don't have that problem pumping up the following day. That happens a lot at the professional level, actually. I'm not quite sure why, but that little touch of diazide at the end to improve calcium retention helps a lot.
Just go into, like, obviously you explained that at tremendous detail to where someone will, again, spend a ton of money on the show, spend a ton of money on the coach, all for this moment. You're talking about all these little critiques of where a coach could seriously mess up, you know, your stage, how would you vet a coach? I mean, obviously I want everyone to hire you, but how would you go around and vet, you know, a coach? What questions would you ask if you couldn't coach your friend, but your friend needed a coach? How would you screen them?
I would look at their resume. I think resumes are awesome. Look at who they've peaked, how they've peaked in the past, meaning don't look at their best clients. Don't look at the IFBB pros.
Right. Yeah.
Look to people with your similar genetic background. That's why I try and post up everyone I work with. Gen Pop, pro athletes, you know, whatever, local athletes, because not everyone has those genetics. See how that coach can peak people with good genetics, bad genetics, male, female, people in that division. Do your homework. It's not so much the questions you ask, or maybe you do ask. You say, okay, in my situation with my genetics, how many people have you worked with? Or not even how many people, but what does that look like for your peak week for me? Because I'm not maybe an IFBB pro bodybuilder. I'd look at that first and foremost, because that kind of tells you everything you need to know.
Awesome. And then you have any closing thoughts about, like, I don't know, peak week? I always see, you know, people get off stage really disappointed. You know, they take a picture 2 days later. Oh, if I showed up, you know, they're pumped up in the gym. If I showed up this day, I would have placed better. Like, the mind games of peak week. You've done a ton of peak weeks, pro level, local level. Like, what's your closing thoughts around peak week? Because everyone's sweating. They're at the end of the race. They get to peak week. They fumble the ball.
Yep.
And that's the worst.
Put your trust in someone other than yourself. Because at that level, when you are so depleted, so low at a body fat level, neurological tissue is not working like it should. You are working at half capacity. You got to trust your coach or your partner or your friend or someone that you can rely on to just say, keep your mind on straight. So that means wear sweats all of peak week. Don't look at yourself. Take a video for your coach. Send it off to the coach. Don't worry about it. Don't look at yourself. Don't overthink. You have to have someone that you trust so then they can tell you what's really going on. Because I remember the last time I was getting ready for the 2020 Arnold Classic before COVID happened. I had shredded glutes 3 weeks out before I had to get my gallbladder out. And I was like, I got so much fat on my glutes, I'm not going to be ready. And I look back at pictures now, I'm like, I was pretty dang close, you know? And it's a mental game that occurs. So find someone that you trust, whether it's your coach, your best friend, your partner, something like that. I feel like that's a massive part. Don't pose every 5 minutes. Stop looking at yourself in the mirror because that just makes it worse.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it so much. As always, theprepcoach.com if you want to get a hold of Kikel for anything. You don't just do bodybuilding preps. That's why I like you so much. I'll link his Instagram so you can see all the other work he does, but I feel like Kikel would have an answer for your specific problem, and unlike me, you can actually easily get a hold of him, and he has it all systemized to where you would get a hold of him very promptly.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you.